Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. One of the wonderful things about this evening event is that Amanda Achtman has been the architect and the coordinator and the guider and the inspirer and the passion behind it. So once I get done, I don't have to do too much else, and that's a good thing. So, but I do have a few little things to do, so I'm just going to begin with my my little sharing here. So good evening, honored guests, dedicated leaders from our community, care facilities and churches, and all who cherish human dignity and our commitment to Christ's healing ministry. My name is Peter Oliver, and I am the Executive Director of the Catholic Health Association of Saskatchewan. As we enter into this evening, I would like to express words of appreciation to Norm Lipinski and Michelle Dinder-Lipinski, I'll get it right, whose musical skills raise our spirits and encourage our faith. Also, as we begin, it is important to acknowledge our shared journey toward truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous and Métis people of our province. So, in a spirit of justice and reconciliation and remembering the Indigenous lands of our province are shared through treaty, we acknowledge these lands as the ancestral home of the Plains Cree, Saulteaux, Assiniboine, Sioux, Dene, Chipewyan, and Dakota. We also acknowledge this land as the homeland of the Métis Nations. This evening we will be addressing a number of very sensitive issues, and I would like to take a moment to speak about concerns that may arise. First, thank you so much for being with us for this special evening, From Death into Life, Finding Reason for Our Hope. This evening we will be touching on topics including mental health, suicide, death, euthanasia. We are engaging in these topics together as a community, and we know they may touch many of us deeply and personally. Feel free to step out if you need to at any time. You are also welcome to approach me or Amanda or to speak to us one-on-one during the social that follows. We appreciate your presence here immensely and are working to cultivate an atmosphere of profound support and trust within our faith community and in our broader health care settings so that everyone can know they are not alone. So with those few brief words of introduction, I would like to invite Archbishop Don Bolen to come forward, and just a note. So unfortunately, Bishop Mark is not able to be with us this evening, but he has asked Archbishop Don to take his place. So an Archbishop Don will offer opening prayer and words of welcome. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, Bishop Mark sends his greetings, but if there is one church outside of the Archdiocese of Regina where I feel a certain comfort in welcoming people, it is this one, having had the privilege of serving here as bishop when it was built. And so we are very grateful for all of your presence. Welcome to this event, and welcome to your, we celebrate, I guess, our joint support of human dignity and the struggle to value and treasure human life. The title, From Death into Life, feels a little bit like this is an Easter Vigil celebration, in the sense that we gather here to celebrate Easter Vigils, and what we do in the Easter Vigil is find hope in the midst of darkness and struggle and pain, find meaning and find God's presence. The subtitle, Finding Reason for Our Hope, echoes words in 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an account of the hope that is within you. So tonight we pray and ask the Lord to open our hearts that we might hear ever more deeply reasons for the profound hope which is at the heart of our Christian lives. So let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, you author our being. You author this human life. You bless us with this life. And you do not leave us here abandoned or alone. In the face of Jesus, we see your compassion. We see your loving presence. We see your willingness to give of self for us. And we hear your invitation to follow you. In sending the Spirit, you give us strength and grace to bring your presence to others in the world, to find hope in the midst of darkness, light in the midst of despair. Help us to deepen our reasons for hope. Give us ever more grounds for standing in the midst of struggle and challenge as a people who can bear witness to the light and glory which comes from the resurrection, which comes from you, Lord God. Be with us and fill us with your joy. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Archbishop Don. Evenings such as this evening require a very significant amount of planning and financial support. We are grateful to St. Thomas More College for sponsoring this evening presentation, and I would like to invite Gertrude Romprey, Director of Mission and Ministry and co-director of the Center for Faith, Reason and Peace and Justice at St. Thomas More College, to say a few words on behalf of the college.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to bring greetings on behalf of St. Thomas More College. But before I do, I just wanted to share a short anecdote that kind of underlines the importance of the work we're doing here and the reason we're gathered here today. So a few weeks back, I was driving back from Grasslands National Park and stopped halfway at Saskatchewan Landing to stretch my legs. And as we do in Saskatchewan, I started chatting with an elderly farmer that was in the parking lot. And after we talked about the weather and the crops, the next thing he started telling me was a story of how he had just recently lost a friend of his, an elderly friend of his who had gotten ill, and in the words of this farmer, had decided to put himself to sleep. And I remember, this is a complete stranger telling me this story in a parking lot in the middle of Saskatchewan, obviously disturbed and obviously needing to find meaning in this experience. And that's why I think what we're doing here this evening is so important. We're trying to come together as compassionate communities to help people through very difficult times and find meaning in their experiences. The theme from death into life, finding reasons for our hope, I think speaks deeply to all of us, families, friends, healthcare workers, the man I met in the parking lot. So on behalf of St. Thomas More College, I am truly honored, and we are truly honored to support the work of the Catholic Health Association and to help sponsor this evening. We believe in the importance of working together as Catholic institutions, each bringing our own gifts to bear on the difficult situations and complex realities of our world. We share, along with the Catholic Health Association of Saskatchewan, the desire to deepen our understanding, to enter into respectful dialogue, and to be witnesses to the power of compassionate communities. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing us to be part of this process and for being the reasons for our hope today. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Gertrude. There will be a social afterwards, which we're very grateful to Universal Church Supplies for helping to support that as well. Amanda Achtman travels across Canada and around the world to prevent euthanasia. And encourage hope through her project, Dying to Meet You. Indeed, she has just returned from engagements in Ecuador. Amanda studied political theory in Calgary, the life and legacy of John Paul II in Poland, and the resurrection of the dead in the Jewish tradition while in Rome. She has worked on Parliament Hill to prevent the expansion of euthanasia from those with disabilities and mental illness. Currently, Amanda collaborates with the Canadian Physicians for Life, focusing on ethical education and cultural engagement. She has been instrumental in the visioning and planning of this evening. At this time, I would like to invite her to come forward and moderate the presentations.
Thank you, Peter. It is such a joy to be with all of you. Thank you for your presence for this important evening. My name is Amanda Achtman, and I am dying to meet you. I prevent euthanasia and encourage hope, and see this as one of the most serious social and cultural crises of our time. Your presence here signals your own engagement in these issues, and I'm sure that many of you have direct and personal experiences of being touched by these matters in our time. So thank you for your presence. Tonight, we're going to have a series of testimonies. These testimonies will be very moving, and the reason for testimony, well, it's central to our faith, as we've already discussed, giving witness, giving reasons for our hope. One of my favorite prayers is the Anima Christi prayer, and in that prayer, there's that beautiful line, "In your wounds, hide me." In your wounds, hide me. What does it mean for us to be hidden in the wounds of Christ? How can a wound be a shelter? And if part of the way in which we are in God's image, and if part of our call of following Christ involves imitating this, how can we be a shelter for the wounds of others? We can only do it by hiding them in our very own woundedness. And so the testimonies you're going to hear are intended to be that, are intended to be a kind of shelter to enfold you. But also we know this beautiful language at Easter time of Christ's glorious wounds. And that is a mystery, that wounds could be glorious. But we're going to consider that mystery together in this communion that we share, because compassion is a communion in suffering of those who love. So before we move into this portion with the testimonies, we're going to have a little bit of music, which you will be able to join in on. And this is to set a meditative tone to our evening together. And then I will invite our first testimony speaker to come. We'll have 4 short testimonies, and then we'll move into an evening with a reflection from Archbishop Bolen, followed by a brief panel discussion. So thank you once again for being here. Your presence is so important, and I hope you'll be very touched by all of this. Now we'll go to the music.
You all heard this Taizé chant as you were walking in this evening. It is a chant called Bless the Lord, and the words are, "Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life." Please join us. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life.
This time I invite Katarina, our first speaker, up to give her testimony.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. So, I grew up in a busy Catholic household as the youngest of 5 children. According to my parents, I was generally a very happy child and pretty silly child too, but I always felt I was more sensitive than others. Throughout school, I was bullied a lot, especially for my weight and my family's economic status. My faith and my relationship with God was often something I leaned on for consolation and support in these trying times. That being said, as I grew up, I became more and more aware of my sin, and I began developing the core belief that God could only love me if I was good. As a result, I often blamed myself for the bad things that happened to me. When I was 12, I went to a 2-week-long summer camp where I was emotionally and physically abused. Again, feeling like what had happened to me was my fault, I didn't tell anyone until years later about what occurred there. Shortly after returning home from this camp, I began suffering from severe insomnia, anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder. I started really struggling in school and had a lot of trouble staying focused and getting my assignments done on time. At the same time, the bullying continued, and I lacked a lot of support. At the age of 14, after being too afraid to leave the house for a month, I attempted suicide for the first time. I wanted the pain to end, and I was crying out for help. I also ended up in an impure relationship, and because of how desperate I was to feel love and accepted, I remained in this relationship even after it got abusive. This ultimately made me feel like God absolutely could not love me anymore. So I left the church at 15 and declared myself an atheist. Over the next few years, I had ups and downs and attempted suicide more times than I can count. At a rock bottom in my life, I returned to the church. And while I experienced a lot of healing from this return, I still struggled a lot with my mental health. At another major low, and spurred on by a need for a medication adjustment, I lost control of myself and got in trouble with the law. Thankfully, I received the professional help I needed, and by the grace of God, I was able to hold on to the hope that my life was still worth living. For the past year and a half, I've been working with an amazing Christian therapist who has helped me heal from a lot of the trauma of my past and regain freedom in my life. I am so happy to be alive. I thank God every day for my parents, friends, and the professional supports who kept me alive when I wanted to die. That being said, things can change quickly for me. And while I am hopeful that even throughout suffering and intense emotions, I can stay grounded and trust the Lord, there is always the potential that a depressive episode could lead me back into a dark place of suicidal ideation. Mental illness has led me to lose control of myself in the past, and it's why I am grateful that mental health professionals have been required by law to safeguard my life. I fear the dangers of MAID for myself and others who may find themselves in similar circumstances. Knowing how crucial it is to do more to address mental illness, including in the church, is what gave me the courage and confidence to share my story with you all today. I thank God for bringing me to where I am today and for showing me time and time again that His love and mercy is greater. Jesus has taught and is teaching me to trust Him more and more, knowing that He will always love me and desires me to be a saint even more than I do. I hope we can all pray and work hard together to ensure the safety of all people who, like me, suffer from mental illness, so that everyone can discover or rediscover the freedom and hope I found and in which I now seek to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Now I welcome Sheila.
Evening. I'm a physician, which has some relevance to my story. More importantly, however, I have been mother to Ross Harding, a cheery, cheeky, bright boy who lived with significant and often painful disability until his death at age 10. It's also important to note that I have been accused of crying at supermarket openings. That is to say, I would not typically choose to speak publicly about emotionally laden topics. It is uncomfortable to put my professional persona at risk in public. Nevertheless, here we go. I graduated from medical school in 1981. At that time, while we were vociferously debating abortion, I said that if we accepted abortion on demand, we would, before we retired, be killing patients. My classmates teased that I was being a drama queen and dismissed my concerns. I wish I had been wrong. I joined the faculty in the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon in 1988. My work has been a blend of direct patient care, clinical laboratory oversight, teaching, research, and administration. Fast forward to late 1993. I'll never forget driving home on College Drive, listening to CBC Radio News, and hearing that a young girl named Tracy Latimer had been killed by her father in a so-called mercy killing or compassionate homicide. My heart sank, and I had a foreboding sense that this one event would be a turning point in the euthanasia debate in Canada. I wish I had been wrong. For those who never knew or have forgotten, Tracy Latimer was a 12-year-old girl who lived with severe cerebral palsy, unable to speak or walk. She was raised on a farm near Wilkie, Saskatchewan, with her parents and 2 siblings. When she was born, it had been predicted that she wouldn't live to the age of 12, but she did. Then, on October 24th, 1993, anniversary pending, while her mother and siblings attended church, her father carried her out to his truck and filled it with carbon monoxide. After she had died, he carried her back to her bed so that her mother would find her there after returning from church and assume the death was natural. The carbon monoxide poisoning was identified on post-mortem examination, and the truth came out. Tracy's father was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now out of jail for more than a decade, he has yet to express any remorse. Our son Ross was 7 years old at the time of Tracy's death. We tried hard to shield him from Tracy's story, but it proved impossible. Saskatchewan media was saturated with it, and everyone had an opinion. Most disquieting was the repeated assertion that Tracy's father had acted out of love and compassion for his daughter. But what made us realize that Ross had been paying close attention all along was when at breakfast one day he said, "You know what? The next time I get sick, you don't have to kill me, okay? I can take it." My heart leapt into my throat and I felt gut-punched. I had no words. Ross's dad, Terry, jumped in quickly to reassure him that we would always protect him and that we would never consider killing him for any reason. We affirmed that our love and compassion would always be directed toward helping him live his best life, no matter what. We refuted the idea that Tracy's father had acted out of love and compassion. Rather, Tracy died the day the love ran out. Ross accepted our reassurance, and we didn't have to revisit that particular conversation. He would occasionally say, without anxiety, things like, "I'm going to like living in heaven because my joints won't hurt, but not yet." And he would later articulate his own conviction that it was a good thing that he existed, saying, "God knew the world needed someone like me." As more details about Tracy emerged, Ross would often compare and contrast. What did they have in common? What was different? He concluded that his ability to speak for himself was the most important difference. He'd say, "I can tell people what I think and feel and want." With Tracy, they had to guess. I was gripped by that reality. Ross could articulate his anxiety that we might ever consider killing him and receive clear reassurance about his safety. What of other disabled children who understood well enough what had happened to Tracy, but couldn't express their own thoughts or feelings? I thought to myself, if this child in this household can be worried about this, then what child anywhere can feel safe? And so despite my personal discomfort with the idea, I knew that I had to engage in the battle more publicly. Gradually, with God's fist in my back, I found my voice and my pen, trembling and tears notwithstanding. I spoke up at every opportunity, at work, at church, at women's retreats, at pro-life conferences. I wrote letters and articles. I tried to oppose my profession's reckless sprint away from traditional Hippocratic medicine toward the introduction of euthanasia and assisted suicide as therapeutic medical services. I tried to persuade my faith community that the threat was real and needed active resistance. I tried unsuccessfully to institute policies in the MD program that would protect medical students from any expectation of participation in MAID. I worked with many others in Saskatchewan and beyond to advocate for provincial legal conscience protections for all healthcare professionals, also unsuccessfully, at least thus far, in Saskatchewan. I know that Mother Teresa liked to insist that we are not required to be successful, but rather we are called to be faithful. Yet it's a tremendous cause of sorrow when not being successful in preventing euthanasia means the premature deaths of so many. I grieve the loss of the profession as I once knew it, and at the same time I know the true life-affirming medicine. I know what it's meant to be, and that this doesn't change. When I made the difficult decision to close my clinical practice, I was able to increase my contribution to clinical laboratory work and to refer my patients on to other colleagues. However, this was a substantial loss for me, personally, and I think for my patients too. Despite my grief, I take solace in the reality that I am not a lone soldier in this. I'm in very good company. The next generation of physicians is stepping up in powerful ways to witness to and work for life-affirming medicine. I'm encouraged that people with disabilities and those who love them are finding their voices and taking action to protect this most vulnerable group of Canadians from our predatory euthanasia regime. It is my fond hope that children like our son Ross will be able to grow up in a Canada that affirms their value, asserts that it is good that they exist, and treasures them for exactly who they are, each a unique and irreplaceable instance of the image of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Now I invite Linda to come and share her testimony.
Good evening. 11 months ago, just one day after our 88-year-old father was moved into a long-term care home in the Saskatoon Health Region, I, as patient advocate, received a blanket email from nursing to all families of the residents there. The residents and families were invited to a public education presentation on MAID in the dining room of the facility, as some patients had expressed interest in the topic. Now, this is wrong on so many levels. My siblings and I were expecting palliative care until natural death in a long-term care facility that provided palliative care. We did not want an unasked for education on MAID. We wondered why not a single filter had been applied. If they had bothered to check, his 2019 health directive showed that he wanted a natural death. And in 2022, he failed a cognitive test. But no one asked before sending that email. We were so perturbed by this unwelcome invitation that we did not want him to remain at the facility we had just transferred him to. We worried, we obsessed, we resented the emotional turmoil that this intrusion brought into our already tumultuous lives, and we became defensive for our loved one. Each one of us was deeply concerned. Had someone approached our father with this invitation? It was hard not to overreact to that email. And my siblings and I did not want to make a rash decision, but we took this very personally. I still cannot find the words to express the level of disappointment and the distrust that we each had and still have in the SHA, health professionals who actively promote MAID when they should be focused on providing palliative care to our vulnerable aging population and their distressed families. We knew we were in the final weeks or months of our father's life, and we were prepared to accompany him until it was his time to go. He was not afraid of the human experience of suffering, of goodbyes, of dying, and neither were we. As family and friends care for a loved one that is preparing to loose their mortal coil, those of us who are chosen as companions will anoint them with tenderness, with love, with our tears. Our family experienced moments of deep sorrow, moments of stillness, of clarity, and a closeness to our dad that could only be compared to that of a mother and her newborn. Holy moments and sacred ground. So a good life, every life is like a good book, and we wanted one more chapter, one more page, one more word, but we knew we were coming to the final page, written by the author of all life. We did not turn away from the inevitable sorrow and the loss. Dad had 7 weeks in that facility, His fragile body was failing as end-stage multiple myeloma took its toll. But his spirit never faltered. His faith never faltered. When he was too ill to attend a prayer service, he prayed along from his bed. He shared his love of music, and you could often hear polka tunes from his CD player as we walked toward his room for a visit. There was one fellow who cried out and bellowed during meals, and it disturbed everyone's peace. Dad wasn't there for too many days when he wheeled over and gently touched the man on the forearm, saying, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" The fellow was surprised and agreeable, and then Dad began to chat with him, gently asking simple yes or no questions. If the fellow was bellowing from his room 3 doors down, Dad would wheel over and offer him a wrapped toffee, which took some concentration to open and a bit of time to chew, and all was quiet. And I believe then, and still do, that a blanket approach to MAID in any palliative care facility is a failure in care that in no way respects the beauty of a life and the holiness of dying that everyone at the end of their life is entitled to. It is a breach of all the standards, protocols, and so-called safeguards in the legislation. Euthanasia is tragically and unfairly dismissive of the value that each person brings just by being them. The staff told us that they fell in love with our father within a day and a half of his arrival. He glowed with love. It radiated from him. He lived with compassion. He embraced his circumstances, as did we, and those 7 weeks were full of life. He gave us a high bar to live up to and an example of living that none of us could ever have imagined not being there to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Now I invite Peter up to share.
Yesterday, Amanda and I visited the Saskatchewan Penitentiary. She'd never been to prison before. Like everyone else, prisoners have access to MAID. She wanted to know the inside story. What's a prison like? Okay, says I, let's go to Saskpen. We talked on the way. Capital punishment was outlawed in Canada. Now we offer voluntary lethal injections. A dark thought. Prison is not new to me. I worked in our prisons and with prisoners for 13 years. The pen is not totally new to me either. I'll tell you a bit of a story. Do you have time for a bit of a story? A number of years back, 2 men broke into my mother's home, and one man, carrying a hatchet, cut off most of one of her ears. While she lay bleeding on the kitchen floor, they carried her possessions out the house, stepping over her as they did so. They stole her car. A neighbor called the police. They were apprehended. One of the men committed suicide. The other was declared a dangerous offender. The dangerous offenders are almost never released from prison. That's not the end of the story. 13 years later, my mother, my brother, and I met with Mervyn, the man who assaulted my mother. We met in the Saskatchewan Penitentiary in a circle and with the assistance of 2 federally appointed mediators. We met to talk about what happened. We began by going around the circle, and each one of us spoke about something we were grateful for. We talked about the night of the assault, how it had affected us. Mervyn told us what he remembered, how he felt. My brother Dickon, after it happened, after you attacked my mother, I wanted to get together with my brothers and beat you up. I talked about the need for reconciliation, how the justice system often fails to repair the harm done by crime. Mervyn apologized. He didn't make excuses. When all the talking was done, he had one more thing he wanted to say. Looking around the room, he said, "You and your brothers, they wanted to beat me up. I understand that. But I don't understand this. I don't understand this at all. People coming to talk to me, people coming to listen, to sit in a circle." My mother and Mervyn kept contact with each other by letter until she died. It was one of the last things she spoke about when she was in palliative care. Weeks after our meeting, he still couldn't get over the experience. An incredible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. A burden. That's an important word. Lifting a burden from a brother's shoulders. The men we met at Saspen yesterday talked about the communities they came from, conditions in prison, suicide, abuse, addictions. What keeps you going? What's court like? We talked about not being able to trust anyone and what it's like to be doing a life sentence. We talked about the burden they shoulder every day, and we talked about MAID.
Thank you, Peter. That was indeed quite an experience visiting the prisoners with you, along with Archbishop Hero, or with Bishop Hero. And I'm thinking about what you said about burdens. We know that among the reasons why people are tempted to euthanasia is feeling like a burden. If you think from time to time that you don't want to be a burden, what does that say to those who are prisoners, to those struggling with mental illness, to those on the street? Aren't we all kind of burdened by things? People are not burdens. People have burdens. And when we carry one another's burdens, this is how we fulfill the law of Christ. This is real life. This is real living. This is our world. This is the church. This is our task. Bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. Remember that we are not burdens, but we are all burdened by things. So how can we come alongside, enter into communion, and realize that the drama of suffering is transformed? The drama of suffering becomes redeemed even when it is transformed into a drama of love. Now I'd like to invite Archbishop Bolen to come and share some reflections.
Thank you, Katerina and Sheila and Linda and Peter. Like all of you gathering here, I am hearing these stories for the first time, these accounts, which are so moving. A brief word to each of you. Katerina, thank you for the vulnerability of sharing your story with us so that we can learn with you and support you. Thank you for choosing life. Thank you for your courage, for which we are all blessed. Sheila, thank you for your lifelong witness in the medical community for the value of life. We are all so grateful, and thank you for sharing the story of your son and his witness. God knew the world needed someone like me. What beautiful wisdom from a young child. Linda, Thank you for witnessing what it is to accompany in love when one of our loved ones is dying. Thank you for the courage to stand up against unwanted pressure and blanket approaches to euthanasia, and for recognizing that being with someone who is dying is a holy activity, is beautiful even amidst the pain, and for trusting that the final page would be written by the author of life. Peter, thank you for sharing the story of your family and your mother, and with your brother, your courage to go into a place of deep woundedness. This is a parable of what God does for us. This is what God does for us in the incarnation, comes to this place of pain to be with us. It's what happens in the Paschal mystery. And it's what brings the transformation from death to life. Brothers and sisters, God loves this human life that God has created, loves it passionately and deeply. But it is not easy. God did not create the human condition for some kind of bubbly love experience, but rather brings us into the Paschal mystery in the course of the struggles and burdens of our lives. Beautiful clarification, Amanda. We are not burdens, but we have burdens, and boy, do we ever. But God embraces us in them. God embraces us in the midst of those struggles. Leave you with this. Life is the first gift, the primary gift that God gives us. Every other gift, every other experience and joy and blessing only comes to us because of the foundation of the gift of life. And when we lose sight of that, when the society around us loses sight of that, it's not surprising that it becomes morally unhinged. And so it is our task and our blessing and privilege to witness that life, despite all its terrible frustrations and burdens, is beautiful. And that we can treasure it and can entrust it to the author of life, and that we can be witnesses to that life, to that blessing. So, thank you all very much.
Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life.
So now we're moving into another portion of the evening for a bit of a conversation. I'll have each of you briefly introduce yourself and what occasions you being here. We'll have a brief discussion together, and then we're going to invite some questions from you, and so you can think about that. And then at a certain point, I'll indicate that if you would like to ask a question, you can come up to the mic over there. So for now, why don't you begin and just share what brings you here today, and maybe some, that can be how to
Absolutely.
begin.
So my name is Dr. Mary Heilman, and I am the clinical ethicist at St. Paul's Hospital, and I also serve as the ethicist for the Catholic Health Association of Saskatchewan. So serving as Chaz's ethicist, part of me being here today is just to help with understanding that hospital side of care, that healthcare practitioner kind of side of things.
Great.
Hi, I'm Dr. Leonie Herkson. I'm a palliative care physician in Calgary. I've worked in Ontario and Alberta and in both adult and pediatric palliative care. I've been on the front lines of experiencing what it's like to have work in a healthcare system with legalized euthanasia and conflation often of euthanasia with palliative care. Thank you.
I'm Amanda Achtman, and I work to prevent euthanasia and encourage hope through a cultural project called Dying to Meet You. And I also work on ethics education and cultural engagement, giving formation to medical students through Canadian Physicians for Life. And so here we are to engage some of the themes that have come up this evening, some of the perspectives shared. And so I think I'll begin by just asking both of you if you would like to comment on what we heard from the testimonies.
Sure. I think as I listened to each of you, Katerina and Sheila and Linda and Peter, what struck me the most was something that I experience in my own work on a day-to-day basis, and that is the need for safety, the need for safe clinicians who don't suggest to you when you're at your most vulnerable, like Katerina, that you would be better off dead and that we should assist you in your suicide completion, but we need to do suicide prevention. Safe families who love and treasure every member, even those who can't speak for themselves. Safe spaces, hospices, long-term care homes, hospitals, that people can go to without feeling the pressure of euthanasia, where they can be cherished like till their last breath, like Linda's dad. And safe laws that protect people from euthanasia for reasons like I think I've experienced working in federal penitentiaries in Ontario, and euthanasia was allowed for prisoners who couldn't get parole and were suicidal but had some other chronic condition that made them eligible. And I think that our laws in society aren't doing enough to protect those most vulnerable. And so this idea of safety, and that we all have a role in our families, our communities, in our advocacy for safe spaces.
I also just felt tremendous gratitude at the bravery that it took to speak to a group, even though we might assume that the people from the Catholic Health Association of Saskatchewan and those of us gathered here, you know, we're an empathetic audience, but it is still very challenging to share a story that makes you feel that level of vulnerability. You know, I think in sharing that vulnerability, you reminded all of us of the vulnerability that we are all carrying with us, no matter where we are, no matter how we live right now. We all have the capacity to be wounded. In your stories, the thing that separated you from maybe some of us in the audience is that you became aware of that vulnerability in a very acute way. And we haven't all felt that yet, but we all will at some point in our lives. And so I'm just very grateful to each of you for bringing voice to that. I think it serves as a reminder of all of us that this needs to be taken seriously, that we need to remain awake and ready to defend each other.
Thank you. When I think about so many Canadians asking for euthanasia and the reasons why Canadians are asking for euthanasia, there are many, and it's complicated. I think, though, that every request for euthanasia is not so much the expression of a desire to die as it is an expression of a disappointment. Euthanasia is not so much about a desire to die as it is an expression of a disappointment. Could you comment on that? Do you have anything to say about how we might be able to be adequate to the human person in distress, in vulnerability? How can we hear the cry of the heart, which is a cry for help, and respond adequately to so many disappointments that people face, leading to despair?
I'm gonna ask easy questions, Amanda.
It's what we call a compound question. You know, I think part of it is that in order to hear it, we have to be listening. We have to adopt a listening attitude to be able to hear those moments. In the past, I don't know, I want to say several months in my work as a clinical ethicist, I've received more than one consult from a team member who feels a sense of panic. They've had a patient who they've been journeying with who's been receiving acute treatment, having more and more things done, in one patient's word, done to me rather than for me. And now all of a sudden, in the healthcare provider's eyes, all of a sudden, our patient has contacted the MAID program, which in Saskatchewan is available directly. You don't need to go through a physician to access MAID in Saskatchewan. So we're panicked. We don't understand why this patient has chosen MAID when we were doing everything for them. Why are they even contemplating this? And I often ask that care team, did you talk to them about their end of life? Have you talked to them about what their wishes were, how they envisioned their dying? And there's almost this sense of fear. If we had asked him that, he might have told us, you know? He might have told us more than we were prepared to absorb in that moment. On a separate panel that I was doing, I guess it was yesterday, one of the things that I mentioned is, I wonder what this new reality of MAID would look like for us, having euthanasia legalized. I wonder what it would have looked like if we had been comfortable with end-of-life conversations first and legalized euthanasia second. But here we are in a reality where we've legalized euthanasia before we were comfortable with end-of-life care conversations. And I don't think we're prepared to deal with that, to find the moments to listen, because we're afraid of what we might find.
Yeah, I think opening the door to label and name the things that we're worried about, scared about, and I think I talked earlier today, using the D words actually gives people permission. Like, we're so scared to say, oh, they passed away, and it's like a social nicety, but actually we need to talk about dying and death. And I think that's one of the things I've learned from children that I take care of in pediatric palliative care. Like, they want to talk about what their death is going to be like. They very matter-of-factly will say things like, I know I'm going to die, and but then it gives permission for their families and their caregivers to enter into a conversation about what they're scared about too. And that actually, like you said earlier, we're both wounded. So actually giving space and permission and coming alongside, just being present and not having to fix everything. I think not, in my experience, and I've been doing palliative care for 18 years full time, people don't need us to fix things, but they need us to be with them in it. And that alone sometimes is all that's needed for them to get through what they're experiencing and come to the other side and know their life is valuable and want to be present in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a novelist I really like, and she says, all sorrows can be born if you can put them in a story or tell a story about them. And I think the same holds with all sorrows can be born if you can share them in some capacity. And that's what's inherent in storytelling that she's getting at in the first place. Because we cannot reveal the meaning and the mystery of our own lives to ourselves, by ourselves. That's why autonomy is boring. It doesn't cut it for us. We need the gaze of another who looks at us, a gaze that meets us, that sees us in a way that we are incapable of ever looking at ourselves if not having been met for that gaze. We need someone outside of us, outside of ourselves, to be a kind of prophet of hope, as Pope Francis is calling all of us to be. A prophet of hope who looks to us and says, what your heart deserves exists. What your heart deserves actually exists. And that consists largely in presence. Now, do you have any questions for each other?
So many.
Where to start?
Do you have any good recipes for pumpkin pie?
For pumpkin pie. Yeah.
I also want to say that if you are starting to think of questions that you would like to raise, you could start lining up at the microphone anytime, and we'll come to that line once I notice it appearing. Now, we know that one of the leading reasons that people say, according to their own admission, that leads them to request euthanasia is a loss of ability to engage in meaningful life activities, more than a fear of being a burden, more than a loss of autonomy or control, more than even pain or the fear of pain. The top reason why people cite leading to their request is an inability to engage in meaningful life activities. So this raises several questions. Do we ever, as human persons, lose the ability to engage in meaningful life activities? Certainly, we all have lost some abilities over the course of our life. And in what way are we prepared to meet such loss? Even good activities to which we are attached, good relationships, we can lose. Is there a way that we can fortify ourselves such that we do not become debilitated when we lose certain capacity?
I mean, I think that's something that I continue to see a lot is just these, I would call them ableist views of our society. Could be, out of utilitarianism, like we are worthy because of what we do, not because of who we are. And I think that is part of it's a challenge today in our culture. And so when we're no longer independent and when we have to rely on someone else to wipe our bums and turn us in bed, for some reason we're less valuable and less important. And we have this expectation in the society that we are burdening other people instead of, I think as we talked about earlier today, that we actually all need to rely on each other at different stages in our lives. And I use this analogy a lot because it resonates with people, but we don't ever say when we have to carry around a baby who can't walk and we have to change the baby's bum that baby is a burden. Or, but we for some reason have this sense that if we become incapacitated from illness or aging, that somehow we're burdening other people. And I think we need to shake up this in our culture and be like, no, we are all dependent on each other, and that changes through different periods of our life. And what a gift that we can care for each other at those times of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the one thing I would add is that I think it's normal that throughout our lives, the activities that bring us meaning would change. Right. When I look back to 10 years ago before I had children, I went out and I played basketball. I sat on the couch and read a book. I read a book, Now those things aren't so possible anymore. Is my life devoid of meaning? No, the things that bring me meaning have changed. And I think that we don't leave room for that change to happen. All we see is the ending without the hope of the new beginning.
Thanks for sharing that. All right, we'll now come to our question askers. Please keep your questions succinct and for the benefit of the whole community. Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's an excellent point because certainly there is a big difference when we suffer a loss that is natural. Still, death is grievous, it hurts, it takes place, and we suffer. But it's very different when death is inflicted compared to when it happens. Because when a person opts for euthanasia, as you touched on, the persons who are left behind are left with the sense that they were not worth sticking around for. Children are left with the sense that they have been orphaned on purpose. Orphaned on purpose. So it's very different. The alienation that happens, the grief that takes place. And yes, it can be difficult to watch our loved ones suffer, but it's worse if they disappear without any of those experiences to which we could be privy And so thank you so much for sharing that. Would either of you like to comment?
I would just like to say that, you know, in all the years that I've been doing this work, and I go back again to how much I've learned from children, there is so much transformation and growth that happens in that time of life. And even if people don't know it when they're going through it, they can look back and see there's just so much opportunity for reconciliation and growth, even if it's not between people, within a person, and the ability and the opportunity to reciprocate care that you may have received from someone earlier in your life. Like, there's just such profound things that can happen. It truly is a sacred time, as you said. And I think we've kind of lost that idea from our culture. Again, maybe this utilitarianism, it's just like, okay, we're done, turn it off. You know, it's so, there's something really missing, and I think that's what you're referring to that gets lost in euthanasia.
I remember when I was working as a chaplain for the Archdiocese of Regina, journeying with a man through palliative care. This was before euthanasia was legalized, and we were talking about his funeral. What did he want his funeral to look like? And he told me, I don't want to have a funeral because I don't want my family to cry. Mm-hmm. And I can remember saying to him, like, they are going to cry. Yeah, yeah. Do you want them to have the support of a community around them while they're crying? And I feel like euthanasia sort of gives you the same false idea that if you do this, maybe you can save your family that's suffering. And I just don't believe that that's possible. Grief will come with death. That's what's supposed to happen. It's how we respond to that that's going to make the difference.
So my first comment, if I may, just and then jump in, is actually I think Canadians don't actually understand well the laws around euthanasia, and there's been such, like, the language itself has been confusing. Medical assistance in dying, what does that even mean? It's euphemistic. I say I do that every day in palliative care. I help people who are dying, but we don't kill people. And so I think there's just been so much confusion around what you've made and what euthanasia and assisted suicide are, and that actually it's legal in Canada to get euthanasia if you have suffering and an underlying condition that makes you eligible. That can be any type of disability, hearing loss, like it could be cognitive impairment, it can be a chronic pain. Like, it doesn't have to be a progressive condition that you're going to die from. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Even healthcare professionals don't know. Many doctors don't know that you don't even have to have treatment for your underlying condition. You just have to know that there's something that could be done. And in some cases, very tragically, euthanasia is the only type of intervention, quote unquote, that's provided. So I actually think there's a lot of ignorance. And as a result, the speed of which the legislation has changed has also been part of the problem. So people didn't actually know this was all happening during COVID, right? When all of these laws changed, that was during COVID. And so I think a lot of it is ignorance. So we have a responsibility to educate and to help people understand so that people can advocate and speak to their parliamentarians as an important thing, for sure.
So I have two thoughts, and I hope they'll be connected by the time I stop talking here. So the first is just a reminder that every MAID practitioner that I have met believes that they are doing the right thing. So I think it can be easy to kind of create this caricature of the person who's supportive of euthanasia, thinking that maybe they're in it for the money, maybe they're in it because they're lazy. That hasn't been true of the people that I have met. But now my second thought, have you ever heard the saying that if all you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail? That if your toolkit, if you are filled with compassion or you know, a feeling of wanting to help people or be with them or journey with them, and the only tool that society has given you that you can wield easily is this hammer, is euthanasia, to be able to do this. It starts to make sense that you would look at people and think, I need to give them this thing that is the only thing that's in my toolkit right now to be able to help them with. I think maybe that's not true for every person who provides euthanasia, because there are some palliative physicians who provide it as well, which are the ones that I just really struggle to understand. Leonie, maybe you can even offer some insight into that, because I just feel like, but you have the other tools, you have the other resources. Why aren't you committing yourself to using them? I'm at a bit of a loss in those circumstances.
Yeah, I would say that it's very few palliative care physicians, by and large, if you look internationally, that it's the most largest group of opposition to legalization of euthanasia is actually the people who face death every day. So palliative care physicians, particularly geriatricians. But there are a few, of course, and I think that the personalities of those physicians might have something to do with it, where that they feel the need to have to fix everything for everybody, as opposed to being uncomfortable with some things we can't fix. And so I've certainly seen that in my work. I don't think that's, broadly applicable, but I think, like anything, there's a spectrum of personalities that are drawn to certain things. So.
Yeah, thanks for those points. I'm remembering reading a memoir by a euthanasia doctor in Canada, because I wanted to try to understand what could possibly motivate someone to prematurely end so many lives. And in particular, I was interested in how she talks about the Hippocratic Oath and says, in fact, I would be doing harm not to kill my patient. The illness is killing them, and I'm simply kind of expediting it. So this inversion of what it means to do harm was there. But I was also very struck because she tells a very candid personal story throughout this memoir. She describes suffering her parents' very traumatic, for her, divorce. When she was just 13 years old, her parents separated. It was very fraught. And she goes into quite a bit of detail about that. And then she says, the way that I needed to compartmentalize due to my parents' divorce enables me to compartmentalize such that I am able to do made. That is her own account in her personal memoir. An admission that her participation in this evil and in this false compassion comes from her own deep woundedness and brokenness. And indeed, reading that, I think, is a help to me against the temptation to dehumanize those who I would consider dehumanizing of others, and moves me to pray even for those who are participating. And perhaps we can all, in a special way, pray for those who are both victims and perpetrators of this injustice, because we will their good. And what makes our position so unique is that we want the best for everyone. We want life and flourishing and adventure and companionship and communion for absolutely everyone. This is not an exclusive aspiration, because this is what's adequate to every human heart. Thank you. I can't resist mentioning that I interviewed an 88-year-old woman who, after the legalization of euthanasia, decided to get a tattoo right here that says, "Don't euthanize me." So I'm not saying that you necessarily all need to go get tattoos with that, but maybe we can turn to...
But actually, the disabled community in Canada and groups like Inclusion Canada have been advocating and providing resources to people with disabilities, because they are scared to go to healthcare facilities now. Like, there's been lots of campaigning and education to say, don't go to the hospital alone, because you're in a state of vulnerability. If you're acutely unwell and you go to the hospital and you have euthanasia suggested to you, not just once but multiple times. I've had one patient who told me she had it offered to her 6 times in one hospital admission. And eventually you might get to think that, geez, I really am a burden, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there are people carrying around cards that say, don't offer me euthanasia. The tattoos, there's many people getting
signs
those
outside
now.
of different places that say we will not offer.
And so that's one of the things the disability community has come out and said. Can you, if you are a safe clinician, can you let people know that you're not going to suggest euthanasia to us, bring it up unsolicited? And that's one thing I think we can think about, and also advocating for pluralistic safe spaces. That is such an important need within our Catholic healthcare system, for example, and other like we have a hospice in Calgary as well, that's Salvation Army, could be Jewish, but just places that openly say, we provide a safe space for you here. And people who don't want to have euthanasia suggested to them or have that inflicted on them can choose to go to those places because they're safe.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add before we come to our final question?
You know, I'm kind of, I'm pondering a lot. And one of the things that I just would really encourage all of you to think about is, if you are in a situation where you're in the hospital, probably one of the things that you can do to diffuse the euthanasia conversation very quickly is to state quite openly that you're looking for palliative care. To not be afraid to talk about what it is that you want your end of life to look like. It can feel like a very taboo topic, especially if you're with a healthcare team that is always talking about cure all the time, you know, that we're going to go, go, go until we fixed you. To try to shape the conversation, to take control of that shaping, to say that this is actually the approach that you would like, is to be met with that compassion, with that palliative approach. Mm-hmm. I also very much appreciate the comment to go in numbers. You know, even before euthanasia was legalized, before we were even talking about MAID, I think that was probably good advice in the healthcare system, because there are just so many different pressures at play the moment that you come into the hospital, that having an advocate who is with you by your side, understands your values and how you want those to play out. I think that's good advice, whether you're in labor or in delivery or nearing the end of life.
Thanks.
Just wondered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's a big problem in places like Quebec right now. So they have mandated that all hospices have to provide euthanasia, even like, it doesn't matter if you're a religious facility or not. And so it's really causing a lot of distress, not just for patients and families, but also the staff, because it is so counter. And in fact, I would say it's like euthanasia and palliative care are actually diametrically opposed in terms of their philosophy, intention, and approach, which I talked a bit briefly about earlier today. And so actually all the international hospice palliative care associations have clearly said, including all of the ones in Canada, this is not part of palliative care and is not congruent with palliative care. People can choose to access MAID separately, but it shouldn't be part of palliative care. And so we're really trying to advocate to have hospices that are allowed to not provide euthanasia. And I think that is an important piece of advocacy for you to think about going forward, that we need dedicated safe spaces, whether they're long-term care homes, hospices, palliative care units, where people are not going to be forced to have euthanasia suggested to them or worried that it's going to happen in the next room.
Right. Thanks. Right.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a reality too that our healthcare professionals are all on a journey as well. You know, we might want to envision the perfect palliative care nurse who's probably, you know, nearing the end of her career, but not too close to the end of her career. She's compassionate. She's probably been a mother in the past. You know, we have all of these visions of what this person might be. But the reality for each of our healthcare professionals is that they have their own history, their own story that brought them into whatever context they happen to be in. And for some of them, they might be in palliative care and be struggling with these questions around end of life, around whether euthanasia is good or bad or whatever on their own journey. And so you've kind of asked this question about how can they provide good palliative care. I would have that question for them. I think that's part of an understanding and a journey that probably each of them is on. And what I would hope that we would be able to do as a faith community is to provide places where those questions can be asked, where that can be explored with them, or we run into a situation where we stop having the conversation and maybe then our voice is cut out of that conversation.
One way that we can really drive home how incongruent these things are is by discussing how we are in tension between providing suicide assistance to some and suicide prevention to others. Why would some people deserve suicide assistance and others deserve suicide prevention? And if you want to diagnose the social inequalities, it's simple. Whoever gets suicide prevention is in one category and suicide assistance another. This is a clear injustice that we must work to fight. Everybody deserves suicide prevention. This is why I like to insist that euthanasia is quite literally the opposite of love. Because love says, it's good you exist. How wonderful that you are. I want you to be. Euthanasia sends the exact opposite message. I'm not sure it's good for you to be here. Maybe you would be better off dead. But we know that we are called to be prophets of hope, and that this issue touches all of us across demographics, across ages, across backgrounds, and this can become a common ground issue to humanize our society and rehabilitate the dignity in which we all deserve to live. So let's conclude by thanking our panelists as we come to the end of the program.
Because it is only really through prayer that we change and that the world is changed around us. So we're going to say a little prayer here. And then afterwards, I would encourage you to join us for social afterwards. Great opportunity to connect with each other, talk a little bit, debrief if you need to. So social will be, we're going to be in the hall, and Universal's also got some books out that you may want to check out. So let's pray. First, a little reflection from Henry Nouwen. We have been called to be fruitful, not successful, not productive, not accomplished. Success comes from strength, stress, and human effort. Fruitfulness comes from vulnerability and the admission of our weakness. For a long time I sought safety and security among the wise and clever, hardly aware that the things of the kingdom were revealed to little children. That God has chosen those who by human standards are foolish to shame the wise. But when I experienced the warmth, unpretentious reception of those who have nothing to boast about, and experienced a love embraced from people who didn't ask any questions, I began to discover that a true spiritual homecoming means a return to the poor in spirit, to whom the kingdom of heaven belongs. Our joy-filled Father who is in heaven, in the saints, in the fullness of goodness, beauty, and truth, hallowed, holy, respected, and honored be your name. Your kingdom come now in steps we can take. Your will be done in us through steps only you can take. On earth, among us, in us, as in heaven. Give us today bread that is you and patience. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive the harms and hurts and cuts and callousness of our trespassers. And light the way that we may know only love of you. And so deliver us from the grip of death, sin, disease, and darkness.
Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life. Bless the Lord, my soul, and bless God's holy name. Bless bless the Lord, my soul, who leads me into life.